colleagues, let me present the results of my research aimed at analyzing the functions of place names in Sue Townsend's Adrian Mole Diaries series. The material includes 8 books making up a diary series, and the object of research is thus place names or names of locations selected by means of continuous sampling from the above-mentioned books. Place names we analyzed include the following groups of real and invented nominations: macrotoponyms, naming cities, towns, counties, parts of the UK, as well as geographical objects outside the UK, and place names naming urban, village, and countryside locations. Most of them are located in the UK as the kernel setting of the book. Our research is based on studies concerning onomastic density of literary texts and toponymic density, toponymy of literary landscapes, functions and meanings of literary toponyms, symbolism of literary names, and research on Sue Townsend's creative work. The analysis of functions of literary place names is based on the semiotic theory, particularly on the distinction between 3 types of signs introduced by Charles Peirce: indexes, icons, and symbols. According to Professor Grant Smith, the usual reference of names is indexical, in which a sign is interpreted as designating its referent in a simple one-to-one relationship. Thus, indexical reference of literary place names corresponds to the following functions: of establishing the functional space, identifying a geographical location, identifying the dynamics of the plot as setting switches from one location to the other. Iconic function of literary place names can be found in cases when the nomination is used as a talking name or as a secondary nomination. In this case, the function of literary place names is to characterize the place or to indirectly characterize the character associated with this place. Moving on to the symbolic function of literary place names, it is important to highlight that according to many scholars, beginning with Peirce himself, signs are hardly ever used as pure icons, indexes, and symbols. When applying this statement to literary place names, we must take into account the frequency of their occurrences in the text. In other words, if a place name is recurrent in the text, it is likely to acquire and develop the symbolic functions. Besides, for our research, the following statement is very important, as it links the symbolic function of literary place names with the thematic interpretation of literature. Thus, in the symbolic function, places and place names are used as exponents of relations between the characters and the conflicts they face, as well as exponents of a certain theme idea as the object of author's criticism. Besides the functions which can be traced from the semiotic approach to nomination, scholars point out the functions identifying metapoetic relations. The functions of literary place names are intertwined with the genre peculiarities of the book. The diaries under consideration are an example of comedic prose fiction. Humor is inherent in the narrative, interweaving all its layers and producing the effect of parody on other genres which the series embrace. In our further analysis, we will discuss the functions proceeding from the genre peculiarities of the texts under analysis. So let's begin with the diary subgenre. First of all, certain toponyms are found as part of the diary layout after each heading to produce the authentic effect of a diary style. The key settings of the series are clustered around the fictional narrator of the series, Adrian Mole, from the age of 13 up to the age of 39. These settings include the anonymous city in the Eastern Midlands, the anonymous comprehensive school, and other places like Sheffield, Scotland, Skegness, London, Manchester, Leicester, Neil Armstrong Comprehensive, Russia, Oxford, Savages, the restaurant in Soho, Dean Street, Soho, Wisteria Walk, Ashby-de-la-Zouch, Leicestershire, Rampart Terrace, Leicestershire, and some other locations, crowning with the piggeries of Mangle-Parva village in Leicestershire. On this level, the function is indexical. Then let's consider the subgenre of Bildungsroman. These settings, which were mentioned before, are not merely indexes identifying the main character's dwelling places. As they reflect his personal development and dynamics of his relations with other personages, their function as exponents of key stages in his troublesome life. These exponents can be used both as icons and as symbols. The whole story of Adrian's life is looking for home, a metaphor which has a symbolic meaning. He looks for comfort and privacy, but remains homeless throughout all the books. And the stages are spending his childhood in a semi with his parents, moving to Oxford in search of independence. He is eager to get rid of provinciality and win back Pandora, the love of his life. However, Oxford, as a symbol of success, achievement, and bright future, was denied him. As a result, he lives in humiliating conditions in his former girlfriend's box room. His next stop is London Soho and a posh restaurant Hoi Polloi, where he works as a chef and lives in a tiny upstairs room. Finally, the restaurant is closed and turned into a fashionable oxygen cafe. But ironically for Adrian, it is the end of his career as a chef. His return to parents' home is symbolic of the fact that he has to begin his way to succeed from scratch again. However, now he is a single father with 2 sons, but without a job. At a certain moment, after all his troubles, he seems to be rewarded for his kindness and sympathy to all the people, and inherits the house with the name Rampart Terrace, promising safety and independence, where there is enough space for him and his 2 sons. However, Rampart Terrace burns down, and feeling miserable from his mother's reproaches, Adrian makes a decision to move into a council estate with the address which does not promise prosperity. The name of the next council house contains bitter irony, Arthur Askey Way. The name seems to commemorate Arthur Askey, an English comedian and actor. The iconic use of the name as an ironic nomination can be traced in the analogy with the house itself, particularly the contrast between the look of the house and its notorious history and neighbors with bad record. In the book Adrian Mole and the Weapons of Mass Destruction, the author touches upon the problem of people longing for home and becoming victims of mortgage and bank loan schemes. Thus, Adrian's new stage in life is concentrated around his new loft apartment with the following address: the Old Battery Factory, Red Wharf, Leicester, Grand Union Canal. Though the connotation behind the name is transparent, Adrian doesn't hear reasonable warnings of his parents hidden in the inner form of the nomination and explicated by his parents. Eventually, the iconic status of the name proves right. He says, "I am sharing my loft apartment with rats." Furthermore, besides the obvious motivation of nomination, we can give the symbolic interpretation of this name. Adrian, as always, lives with illusions, considering himself the owner of the apartment and enjoying independence and privacy. However, in reality, he is sharing the apartment with financial institutions, which are the real owners of the property, as well as the people, his girlfriend and her parents, who use him financially and psychologically. As a result, financial and moral bankruptcy is inevitable, and his loft apartment, together with his inspiration, is sold out to pay debts. Thus, the Red Dwarf narrative has a frame structure symbolizing the character's vulnerability and gullibility. The apartments, which were advertised as part of Leicester's culture quarter, turn out to be Leicester's vice quarter. Nevertheless, Adrian has met his future wife Daisy, with whom he hopes to find happiness. In the final book, Adrian ends up, however, living with his parents and his second wife in a converted pigsty with the following address: the old pigsty, the piggeries, Bottomfield, Lower Lane, Mangled Parva, Leicestershire. Again, the index, the person's new address, becomes an icon, a talking name, and a symbol showing that the character plunges to the very bottom. His attempts to escape provincial life, to become a successful, famous, and rich author and a happy family man, leading a glamorous life, are ruined. To crown it all, his wife Daisy leaves him for an aristocrat, Hugo Fairfax Lycett, owner of glamorous Fairfax Hall, located on the border with the village of Mangled Parva. Judging by the toponymic density, the dynamics of the narrative corresponds to the classical development of the plot, with exposition, conflict, rising action, achieving its culminating point in the lost diaries and the weapons of mass destruction. And then comes the denouement. In the end, Adrian Mole is, though never being physically alone, remains lonely and miserable. As a political commentary, the series include references to certain hotspots of conflicts or sensational events corresponding to the time of the action. Thus, Adrian Mole becomes witness of the following events: Falklands War, the Gulf War, collapse of the Soviet Union, death of Princess Diana, Hong Kong, returning to China, war in Iraq, and war in Afghanistan. Sue Townsend's individual style, in this case, is characterized by putting these toponyms in the personalized contexts, that is, context describing how different political situations affect the lives of common people, whom Adrian Mole represents. What is perhaps more important is that the author manages to express and mock at the political attitudes of the British society. The context criticizing diplomatic and military conflicts show the main character as the supporter of the government. However, when these hotspots become too closely connected with his life, when his son Glenn goes to Iraq and then fights in Afghanistan in the last book of this series, Mole becomes more realistic about his judgments. As a family saga, the series include toponyms used as cohesive devices, structuring the plot of the book in a series, linking events and characters. The most frequent place names are toponyms naming key dwelling places of the main characters mentioned above, as well as places associated with certain crises, either personal or external. Thus, the author manages to highlight that these external conflicts constantly affect and shape ordinary people's lives as they provoke or sustain internal conflicts. Other places which occur throughout the series are reminiscent of former happy or unhappy events, symbolizing personal crises. For example, Dean Street in Soho and Hoi Polloi as a restaurant where Mole worked as a chef is, in his opinion, the most successful time of his life, as he became a celebrity chef hosting the Cookery TV show Awfully Good. Later, Mole has huge debts because his hoi polloi boss didn't pay taxes for him. Beginning from the first book, Sue Townsend is mapping the landscape of East Midlands, her home country, thus turning her series into a regional novel. Interestingly, in the first two books, Leicester is never mentioned as a setting. However, Townsend mentions regional toponyms naming surrounding cities, towns, and villages like Nottingham, Sheffield, Birmingham, Bradford, which can help identify the place of the action. Some of the most frequent references are made to Skegness and Norfolk, which Townsend depicts with mockery and sarcasm, implying bitter criticism. In her last books, Townsend draws attention to the process which came into practice, connected with the closure of places shaping traditional English cultural countryside landscape, connected with closure of pubs due to the ban on smoking, for example, or when the bookshop where Adrian Mole works is closed and is about to be turned into a supermarket. Or another example, when St. Botolph's Church in the village of Mangaparva is to be disconsecrated and put on the open market. And finally, the genre that we will consider is social satire. In Sue Townsend's system of place names, we may find criticism of the following social issues, just to name a few. Snobbery. Snobbery is mocked at on the example of Peter Savage, foul-mouthed aristocratic owner of Hoi Polloi, a restaurant in London, serving traditional English no-choice menu. Savage's arrogance and despise towards his customers finds its reflection in the choice of the name for his restaurant. Snobbery may also be expressed in showing off their ancestry, as it is illustrated in the example describing the scene where Adrian gets acquainted with his girlfriend's parents. Other examples of characterizing potential of place names are found in context of secondary nominations, when place names are used as similes or metaphors, alluding to well-known images. These are examples of place names used both as icons and symbols. For example, place names are used to characterize the character's appearance, and in this case, the glamorous photograph of Pandora on the election poster is shown when she was running to be elected MP for New Labour. Symbolism behind this simile can be connected with criticism of election campaigns and image making. The example on this slide refers to social issues criticizing National Health Service and also private versus public healthcare system. When Mrs. Mole gets new false teeth, which can be compared with London skyscrapers. Social critique is often found in context, abundant in ergonyms referring to supermarkets, department stores, etc. These are the contexts which ridicule panic buying and commercialization of certain holidays like Christmas, for example. Thus, literary place names are inseparable from the contexts in which they fulfill their iconic and symbolic functions. In Sue Townsend's diaries, place names often come in clusters or constellations with other place names or other proper names, demonstrating a variety of associations and often contributing to a humorous effect. Sue Townsend's diaries are dense in terms of various proper names, place names in particular. It can be connected with the diary style requiring records of facts, and Adrian Mole, a fictional diary writer, keeps a very meticulous record of his life. Place names of a literary text are as multifunctional as other literary names. As a result, understanding the implications that they bear is crucial in understanding the characters described and the conflicts they symbolize, as well as the author's humor, which is one of the key components of Sue Townsend's books. Snowball effect. Dynamics of place names in Sue Townsend's books can be characterized in terms of a snowball effect, the term that I use to illustrate two tendencies. Frequency of place names increases significantly from the first to the seventh book. Frequently used place names develop new functions, acquiring or entailing previously acquired symbolic meanings. In many cases, the tool by means of which the symbolic meanings are developed is humor. Humor of the narrative highlights the key themes the author dwells upon, and place names are often involved in this process. Due to their direct or indirect link with the themes, conflicts, and author's message, most places, especially those frequently appearing in the text, perform not only indexical functions, but are used as icons and symbols. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Anna, for your delightful presentation. I was struck listening to these place names by how humorous they are, particularly things like the restaurant that's named Awfully Good, spelled like offal, that pun, but also kind of the diminishing names, the piggeries in Bottomfield, ironically in a place called Mangold, Parva. Would you like to speak a bit more about the humor of these names?
Well, shall I comment on the implications behind them, or, well,
yes, or just the function of the humor, because it seems like a very, in many ways, this narrative very depressing, right? At one point, we have a mole living among rats, and I was wondering if maybe some of the names, in addition to establishing his downward fall socially, might be there to kind of lighten.
Right. Well, it's an interesting thing. Well, while I have been rereading these books, well, because it's one of my favorite authors. Well, because actually it's very entertaining. Probably when you analyze it, well, what comes up is this, misery of the main character who, well, makes us sympathize with him. But, well, the style of the author is at the same time, well, like really entertaining. Well, I had to flip from slide to slide and probably didn't have time to read the examples more carefully. Well, because, well, of the time limit, but probably
Yes.
I can bring you some of my favorite examples, which I excluded from the slides because, well, they were not illustrating some of the, symbolic things, but still they were quite funny, though again quite sad. For example, Adrian Mole has his former school sweetheart, Pandora, and once he asked her if she loves him, and well, how long will she love him? And she said, as long as Britain has Gibraltar. And then right,
So place name becomes
on the next day, yes, he makes a note in his diary: Spain wants Gibraltar back. without any further commentaries, you know. Well, and Adrian Mole is quite naive and probably, so I can't say that he's optimistic, but it seems that he doesn't notice some of the troubles and symbolism behind all those names, which makes it still funny but sad. Well,
yes, yes. I'm looking to see if we have additional questions for you. I don't see any in the queue. Is there anything else you'd like to tell us before we end your session?
well, I would like to thank you very much for the opportunity. And well, you know, at the conferences, especially when it's quite difficult to take part in them because of the pandemics that we're facing, they like help us to keep on with our studies, because otherwise other things distract us. And well, I should say that, well, this book, as well as the book, I think, which William analyzed, is also very, very rich in all possible types of nominations. And it's actually every name can lead to a separate article. Well, in
We've all found consolation in reading books in these times. Anyway,
yes.
thank you very much, Anna.